followed was Operation Desert Shield, because for many, many, many months, the United States military presence was purely defensive. Defense of the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It was not until 1991, in January, that Operation Desert Shield became Operation Desert Storm. And the reason it took so long, the reason it took 5 months, is because there was little appetite in the American public for a war against Iraq. After all, this was an enemy who had used chemical weapons willy-nilly on his own people and enemies. This is a man who possessed, on paper, the 4th largest army in the world. We should know something about that army, given our relationship in the 1980s. Dangerous foe Saddam Hussein was perceived to be. No blood for oil was a common refrain you heard over and over again. And when President H.W. Bush went to the Congress for a declaration of war, it was not unanimous by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, the Senate almost voted against the war resolution. I want to go back. Sorry about that. 52-47 in the Senate was the vote. A larger margin in the House, but hardly a ringing endorsement of military action. This was the vote on the resolution to turn a defensive posture into an offensive posture. And the fears of the American public here are reflected in the votes in the Senate and in the House. But Desert Shield did become Operation Desert Storm, January 16th, 1991. This is what Americans saw on their TVs that day.
And as best we can tell, the attack on Iraq began maybe 45 minutes ago. It's now 7:41 Eastern Time, 3:41 in the morning in Baghdad. The President is going to talk in about an hour and 20 minutes from now, briefing with the White House.
And I'm told that that speech is expected to last about 10 to 12 minutes, and that the President has worked his way through something like 4 drafts of it. I've heard from other people here that the speechwriters have been on almost 24-hour duty for days and are absolutely bleary-eyed with exhaustion, and in part that's because they've had to work on differing drafts without any real knowledge of exactly what's going to happen. The President has said, however, to have been at work on these various drafts for several days, which goes back to the point you and I were talking about earlier, that he's obviously been contemplating this for some time. He's between 6 and 7 is when he made his call to the leaders. We're told that he did it from the small study adjacent to the Oval Office, and he had Vice President Quayle, National Security Advisor Scowcroft, and his Chief of Staff, Governor Sununu, with him when he made those calls. He also called some foreign leaders. A list of those to come later.
Okay, Rick, thanks very much. A number of people, obviously politicians and statespersons of all persuasion are going to want to talk within the next 24 hours. The Kuwaiti ambassador to the United Nations has made a statement in which he says the military action fulfills the wish of the international community to liberate Kuwait from the Iraqi aggression, and he wishes victory for this operation. It used to be called Desert Shield when it was a standing operation defending Saudi Arabia against any further Iraqi aggression and perhaps waiting for offensive action. Now that it is a war, the President is calling it Operation Desert Storm. The Secretary General of the United Nations, who made that last ill-fated attempt to try to talk Saddam Hussein into a political settlement, has also expected to make some statements a little later this evening. But you will recall, if you're watching or listening to the reporting over the last several days, he came back extremely depressed, in the words of ABC's David Ensor, who flew back from Europe with him. Saddam Hussein seemed much more concerned about offering tea and coffee to the Secretary General than engaging in any kind of a dialogue at all with the Secretary General. And there are people, by the way, those who know Saddam Hussein better than most, not that many people know him very well at all, who believe that one of the things in his mind is to try to get this battle started, to say to the Iraqi people and his other supporters in the Middle East and elsewhere in the developing world that he has stood up to the American imperialists, and then perhaps try to sue for some kind of peace before his country is totally obliterated. That is, if you believe that the American military and the other 25 nations aligned against him in the Gulf are capable of doing the damage which so many military planners have said they are capable of doing. Great human to the White House again. Rick.
Peter, just one brief further thing. We've been trying to get some sense of the nature of this attack, whether this is a preliminary attack with limited goals or whether this is all out. And spokesman Fitzwater simply would tell us that the attack will be, and is being, swift and massive. Swift and massive, his words.
Okay, Rick Hume, thank you very much. We said earlier that the price of oil on the Houston and New Orleans markets, which were still open about a half hour ago, had jumped $3 a barrel immediately on the news that America had gone to war against Iraq. They're now at $35 a barrel. The Tokyo stock market, which is perhaps as sensitive to political and military happenings as any in the world, has fallen by almost 1.5%. It is down 300 points at the moment. War has begun between the United States and Iraq. I say the United States and Iraq because we are not yet sure that other members of the coalition, namely the British and the French, who have an air capability, have engaged in this initial assault against Kuwait and against Iraq. But that is news to come. We will go away and try to pull in some more information over the next 3 minutes, so we will be back after this and a word from your local ABC station. We hope you'll stay with us.
The year is 1991. There is no internet. That's years in the future. Instant news was only available via television or the radio. We live in a world inundated with information. Not the case in the early 1990s. We're going to see now